Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Progressive Democrats of Howard County podcast. This is episode 20. My name is Jake Burdett, president of the Progressive Democrats of Howard County. I'm joined by my co-host Hiruy. How you doing, Hiruy?
Hey Jake, how you doing? I can't believe it's episode 20 already. Given we've been we've been doing a lot of stuff, on working on PDHC and participating in the election and the primary election. I think we're making some we're churning out these videos.
Yes.
Good to be here.
Yes. No. It's it has been a busy year plus for us between launching the club, podcast, running the slate, and getting involved with some of the county council races, which we'll be talking about today, and also launching the pledge. So it's good that we're chugging along here with the podcast as well.
Yeah, I forgot about the pledge. Yeah, that was a big one. I'm really looking forward to this podcast because I think all of us sighed huge let out a huge sigh of relief recently, and we'll get into that in a little bit. How are you feeling so far?
Yeah, so you referenced some of the primary election results in some of the county council races, which were some nail biters there, and that is the topic of today's podcast episode, of discussing these primary results. And in terms of how I'm feeling, feeling a little relieved now that it's all over, because it was brutal couple of months there, knocking doors basically every weekend, and election in the middle of the summer is not always ideal. And it was also very anxiety inducing because of our Republican governor there, Larry Hogan, vetoing a bill that would have allowed the state to start counting the mail-in ballots before the election day. Because he vetoed that, they weren't able to start counting them until 2 days after the election. So it wasn't until like 10 days after the already delayed election of July 19th that we were finally able to learn the final election results. So, particularly when it's a close race, you can't call victory until every vote has been counted. So I'm just glad it's all over. I don't know. How about you?
Yeah, I am also, very relieved. And you mentioned, the procedure, the county procedure this year. I think it allowed many, including me, to sort of have, I would say, a wake-up call in terms of how, um, in terms of what was at stake in this county. And so like we mentioned, we'll get into that, but I think we should start with with a good note. And I want us to say, I'll say this. It's really tough to go out there and put yourself out there as a candidate, and especially if without a lot of backing, especially if you're a grassroots candidate, but even with with a lot of backing. And so I just want to recognize everybody who ran, whether we agreed with them on the issues, whether we really disagreed with them with their tactics. which I would describe in some cases as, you know, abhorrent. But I think, you know, just to say, you know, like, you know, to say congratulations on running, you know, a race. You know, you put yourself out there. You said what you stood for, and you know, the primaries are over. And you know, having said that, you know, I think, you know, maybe we can just, you know, describe some of the races. Where do you want to start?
Yeah. So I think real quick we can just it only really makes sense to touch on the races that were seriously contested in any manner, and I think the real races to watch locally this season were the District 1 and the District 4 county council races, and also the Central Committee slate duel that we were both, you know, on one of the competing slates, Hoko for us. So I think, you know, that's probably where we could talk a lot about, but real quick, we could just talk about some of the other contested races and how they went. So, you know, starting off with state delegate in 9A, which has now been redistricted from, you know, it's currently Republican held. One of the Kittlemans is there, and then a Republican was outgoing. So Republican Reed Novotny got appointed there, and now he's running for state senate. So there's an open Republican seat, and then Trent Kittleman was running for reelection. And you know, it was a historically Republican district that was split between Carroll County and Howard County. It's now been redistricted to Montgomery County and Howard County, and so it's a little bit more in play for Democrats now. Last cycle, it almost went to the Democratic candidates, and now after this redistricting being more favorable to Democrats, this could be the year where Democrats win this one. So on the Republican side, you had Trent Kittleman, of course, getting reelected, and then for the other open seat, you had Saif Rahman, who I believe ran last time, and Jenny Zhang. And it looks like Jenny Zhang came in second and will advance to the general. So it's going to be Jenny Zhang and Trent Kittleman. And then on the Democratic side, you had Steve Bolin and Natalie Ziegler, who both ran last time as the Democrats and came fairly close to winning. Steve Bolin signed the no developer donation pledge. Natalie Ziegler did not. And then you had also Chow Will running. And of course, there's two seats. Chow Will, Steve Bolin, and Natalie Ziegler. Chow Will also signed the no developer donation pledge. Chow Will, current member of the Howard County Board of Education at large. And you know, PDHC, Progressive Democrats for Howard County, we had endorsed Steve Bolin and Chow Will in this race, again, both of whom signed the no developer donation pledge. Natalie Ziegler is not. And unfortunately, Steve Bolin did not win. You know, luckily Chow Wu did win though, but Natalie Ziegler and Chow Wu were the top two vote getters. Natalie Ziegler finishing in first with, you know, comfortable first with 42%. Chow Wu behind with 30%. Steve Bolin with 27%. So Chow Wu and Natalie Ziegler will be facing off against Jenny Zhang and Trent Kittleman in the general. And again, very winnable district for Democrats. It was close last time. It's now been redistricted to include Montgomery instead of Carroll County, which is more Democratic. PDHC, again, has endorsed Chow Wu. I think we'll be doing a lot of campaigning for him. But do you have any thoughts about that race and that outcome, Hiruy?
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts. I'm looking at, you know, the Natalie Ziegler and Chow Wu and Steve Boland's numbers, and so you can vote for up to 2 in the Democratic primary. Conceptually, someone who supported Natalie Ziegler could also vote for one of the 2, you know, candidates. My question is, and I think what people should ask is how were candidates campaigning in that race? And this is what I mean by that. We know, based on how the campaigns were going, that Cha Wu really did not have institutional or institutional support. I think maybe this is the time to introduce the notion of the machine, the democratic machine in Howard County. And when the machine wants you to win, you're going to win. That's it. There's no I think there are a few exceptions, but and we'll talk about the exceptions later, but when the machine wants you to win, you're going to win. And I think, just looking at, based on what I have heard, throughout the primary, just, in terms of the trend, I think the machine clearly had a strong backing for Natalie Ziegler. And that showed in the results. She had 42%, and I think the other two candidates were left, on their own. And I think it's unfortunate that Cha Wu, as an Asian American, as a Chinese American in the Democratic Party, did not receive any of that machine support. And also Steve Bolin, who I think has done a lot in good faith over the past 4 years to gain that support, did not failed, did not get the machine support. So I guess what I mean is, clearly Chow was not, did not have that support. But what happened with Steve? Because I think I think it could have been possible that if the establishment could have said, when you vote for Natalie, vote for one of these two candidates, and each one of them would have gotten decent number of votes, because again, you can vote for up to two. So the top two, the top two advance. So anyways, I thought that was that was notable, and so it will be interesting to see in the general how much institutional support Cha Wu will have against the two, Natalie Ziegler, of course, is a given, but against Trent Kittleman and Jenny Zhang, because I think, to me, there's a concern that the Chinese community who is really actively engaged in the county's electoral politics in a very impressive way, it's going to be split between Cha Wu and Jenny Zhang. So I think there will need to be some sort of other factor to contribute to that. And so the jury is out for me whether the establishment will contribute, will support Cha Wu, who signed the No Developer Pledge, as you noted, and who was endorsed by PDHC, will get that support.
Yeah, and you mentioned that sort of, isn't it interesting that the machine really seemed to be backing Natalie Ziegler, but that wasn't reflected in the outcome for Steve Bolin, and what sort of describes that difference, because as you note, Steve Bolin, I think, I like Steve. We didn't publicly endorse him, though, enough of our members did technically vote to endorse him. And he he's not the most far left guy in the world, but he's a nice guy, he's an honest guy, and I think he really did kind of work in the last 4 years since his last election to try to win over a lot of the establishment support. And his wife is on the Central Committee, just got reelected to the Central Committee. Steve was until very recently the vice president of the Ellicott City Dem Club. So yeah, why wouldn't they back this guy? I think the conventional wisdom was that the primary results on the Democratic side for that race, it would either be Chow Wu coming in first or Chow Wu coming in third in that race. And, assuming that Natalie and Steve were kind of going to be a package similar to how they were last time. And the only difference that I can think of why Steve would not get that establishment push the same way that Natalie was is that Steve did sign the no developer donation campaign pledge. That's the only thing that I can think of, because at the end of the day, that's the only thing that the establishment really cares about is, are you going to go along with our corporate agenda? Not, are you going to be nice to us? Are you going to come to our things? Especially they don't care, are you not going to say any bad things about us? They also want to know, do we have your vote if you get elected? And Steve, again, he's not perfect, but I do think he would be an honest-minded person if elected.
I agree, and I think it's this. It's generally the same reason that will prevent that. My concern is, Chow really has his own base that has helped him get elected to the BOE, the Board of Education, and I don't think, I think he works in good faith too, and I think he is, he collaborates. He doesn't compromise what his principles, but I think he collaborates in a constructive way, and he's that's been shown in the BOE. But you have to, if you are going to get the support, you have to capitulate under the establishment's terms, and and I don't think he will do that. And so, to me, there's a question of whether that will affect how much, or the enthusiasm level from the machine. I mean, he's a person of color, right? So they should really support him, because that's what the party, they're out there saying, inclusiveness, diversity, all of that stuff. So we need to see that in action here.
Yeah, and so I just touched on the reason why I think Steve Bolin didn't get the establishment support, but yeah, I mean, the reason why Chow didn't get the establishment support is Chow also is not, he's not beholden, and hasn't been beholden since he's been on the Board of Education. He's not there because of developer and corporate interests. He's there because of the support largely of the Chinese community, but in general, organic grassroots support, whether you agree or disagree with the guy on everything. And I don't agree with the guy on everything, but, he is there based, from his community, and that's who he's representing, not special interests. And of course, the establishment and people that enable the establishment, they don't say that that's the reason why they don't support Chow. If you ask them, the reason why they say that they don't support Chow is, oh, Chow's too conservative. Chow's not really a Democrat. Chow, and then you ask them, okay, point to some of these things. What's so bad about Chow? Oh, he doesn't support removing SROs from schools. And to be clear, that is a position that I disagree with him on. I do want to remove SROs from schools, and I wish that he was supportive of that on the Board of Education. But then you think about it, and it's like, isn't Calvin Ball not in favor of removing SROs from school? Isn't Opal Jones not in favor? Isn't Christiana Rigby not in favor of Opal Jones? And and I used to, unfortunately, I'm ashamed to admit this, but I used to buy into this thing of like, oh, Chow's really conservative or whatever. And the more I think about it, because again, how come all these other Democrats are given a pass for their quote unquote conservative beliefs, but Chow isn't? And the only thing I can think of is because he is a Chinese immigrant. So he's held to a different standard. And I think a lot of, this hesitance to back or include him in the so-called Big Ten of the party stems from xenophobia and xenophobia, and the fact that he's, a Chinese immigrant who, has an accent, or whatever. So it's easier to paint him as this conservative who doesn't belong in the party, while other Democrats are completely given a pass for the same opinions.
Yeah, I think there's definitely that plays a huge role in how people reach their conclusions about him, because of those factors that you just mentioned. I think the other thing is, these positions don't matter. At the end of the day, it's about consolidating power. So anybody who's out there, deciding who to vote for based on these views, we'll touch on this, but Jansen Evelyn in District 4 was endorsed by the police union. And so, if that's the criteria to, the criterion to evaluate people's candidacy, then that should be, that endorsement should have been, really, that should have been a no-go with a lot of people, and they chose to ignore that. So, this goes back to this, woke racism. So they're okay with these positions as long as it's they help the candidates that they're supporting, help them preserve power. It's, at the end of the day, it's about power. It's about how they will control the county and allocate money to, in Howard County, the most powerful corporations are developers. How they will allocate money to the developers. So yeah, I think the xenophobia and it just I mean, the prejudice, I'm sure definitely plays a role, but it's also about consolidating power. So yeah, hopefully we'll see some changes from the party in terms of how they will support Chow, but I don't to me, I'll see when I believe. I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, of course, that's the real reason. The real underlying reason of why they won't support these people is because they aren't beholden to the developers and the corporate power structure. But they then determine, okay, well, how do we make this person unpalatable to the average Democratic voter? We have to come up with some sort of smear, and the smear that they use against you is usually based off what identity group you may fall under. And so that's the smear that they use against Chow, because he's a Chinese immigrant, is that we're going to paint him as a conservative. And so there were a couple other contested races, but because we're getting into the podcast here, we should probably just go ahead and fast forward to the real the races to watch, which was the county council races, District 1 and District 4 specifically. And if we have time, we can touch on the other races. But so I guess we can start with District 1. That was Liz Walsh, incumbent Liz Walsh, who's unseated incumbent John Weinstein in 2018, who was himself a big developer shill, and Liz ran a very strong grassroots campaign to actually represent the people of District 1 and people of protect Old Ellicott City from further floods. And of course, Liz was greatly outfunded by the incumbent. She only had and she, even though she was outfunded, she won her election by I think 2 or 6 votes or something like that. It was a very, very, very close election. She pulled it out with the grassroots support and toppled again the developer funded incumbent. And in the last 4 years, she's absolutely stuck to what she said that she was going to do. And she had because she's stuck to that and been not beholden to whatever the developers want, not a rubber stamp for what the county executive and developers want. The developers decided to heavily fund a primary challenger to her named Naveen Kurtam, who Hiruy did a lot of breaking down the numbers. I believe what was over 60% of her funding from developer linked entities, Hiruy?
Nearly 70%.
Nearly 70%. So yeah, so this was a race, I think, myself, Hiruy, and a lot of anybody who's, progressive or just cares about, honest local government was really scared. Even Republicans, like my Republican mom was, did not want Naveen Kurtam to win because they knew that that's just going to be a blind rubber stamp for a developer agenda. And, beyond that, Naveen was clearly challenging Liz from the right. She was, sent a lot of mailers out because she had so much money. And the mailers were just like complete dog whistles. I got one. I live in D1, and I got one that literally just had a cop car on it. And she was, very much, we got to keep SROs in schools. Big signs that say police union endorsed. So, and she had a steering committee that had at least three members of the central committee at the time. It had former elected officials who were also very developer friendly. It had a lot of smorgasbord of the establishment on her steering committee. So I think throughout the entire length of the election, Liz Walsh wasn't even running the most active campaign. So I think a lot of us were really scared about how that may go. We didn't really start knocking doors for her until like 3 months before the primary happened, or before the election happened. But lo and behold, election day happened. Clearly, Liz Walsh was right to not be too worried about her big money funded challenger, because Liz, after all votes are counted, got 69.63% of the vote to Naveen's 30.37%. I mean, that's as close to a wash as you get from somebody who's considered a serious challenger. So that was good news. I don't know if you got any thoughts on that race, Hiruy.
Yeah, there are a few things that I think people should understand about this race, and of course the D4 race. This was the Rouse Project Part 2. And I say that for the following reason. The people who are involved in backing Naveen Kurtam and Jansen Evelyn were the same people who were involved in running the Rouse Project or in the steering committee, the candidates themselves. It was the same people who were doing that when they were trying to take over the Columbia Association, the CA Board of Directors elections. And they have been plotting this since 2019, when they realized in early January of 2019 that Liz Walsh and Deb Young were not going to play by the establishment's rules. Just focusing on Liz for a moment. You mentioned the Republicans, even Republicans supporting her versus Naveen, and I think, and we'll see it play out in the general. But my sense is she has demonstrated that she's for accountability. She is fighting for Ellicott City in an earnest way. She's operating in good faith, and she has a lot of popular support, and it showed in the results. This was I mean, for someone who did very minimal campaigning, this is an impressive result. And let's keep this in mind. She is a CEF candidate, so Citizens Election Fund candidate. She was relying on public money. The Democratic Party ran a primary challenger against a candidate who was relying on the CEF program. People should really, that should really give people a pause. That's what happened. As you mentioned, there were 3 members of the Central Committee on the steering committee on Naveen Kurtam's steering committee. That, may seem that, of course, the Central Committee has a rule that individuals can do what they want, but there was a lot of evidence that this was coordinated, and the people who were on that steering committee were playing a role directed by the establishment. Another thing that really gave me a pause was, I'm glad that the teachers union endorsed Liz Walsh and of course Deb Young, but they also endorsed council members Opal Jones, Christiana Rigby, and the county executive. And to me, if you're endorsing these 2 candidates, who have voted with David Youngman, 60% of the time, Liz Walsh and Deb Young, versus Christiana Rigby and Opal Jones, who voted with David Youngman 80% of the time on, and especially their votes are on bills that have led to terrible land use and zoning decisions that affects the schools adversely. I was really, I was puzzled by that, and the inactivity at the polls, in terms of, there wasn't that much, involvement at the polls from the union, as well as, just in general, like campaign related activity that that they have done before. I didn't see that, so I was really puzzled by that. And last thing I want to just want to point out was the involvement of Meriwether Post Pavilion, and I know you have an experience there, so maybe you can touch on that. But initially, Meriwether was advertising for Naveen Kurtam during high school graduations, which Meriwether Post Pavilion is owned by the Downtown Columbia Arts and Culture Commission, which is a nonprofit entity, and it's, for all intents and purposes, this is a public property because the public has given a lot of money for Meriwether for its renovation, in the millions, upwards of $40 million. So that was to me just outrageous. And then of course the other part is maybe you want to describe what happened with at the polls on election day.
Yeah, so I as I mentioned earlier, I live in District 1. And just so people know the background with Meriwether, Meriwether Post Pavilion, of course, everybody knows the big concert venue in downtown Columbia. But, as we mentioned, over almost 70% of Naveen Kurtam, Liz Walsh's opponents' funding came from developer linked entities. And the reason why Meriwether is, connected to the developer industry is until I believe 2016, Meriwether was owned by Howard Hughes Corporation. And then, there's a deal facilitated by Ken Allman where a new nonprofit entity was created called Downtown Columbia Arts and Cultural Commission to essentially control Meriwether, that is now run by Ian Kennedy, but it is in practice still effectively under the thumb of Howard Hughes Corporation and the interests of Howard Hughes Corporation. And they have influence over zoning and land use decisions. And so that's why, Meriwether has this vested interest in the county council races and knocking off people like Liz Walsh who are not funded by developers. And so my experience at polling days on election day, at the polls at Elkridge Landing Middle School where I was, is some very young women, came up at like 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. Close to when the polls were opening, and these people were very young. At looked like they were still in high school, had braces, and so I it didn't look like they were of voting age, so I didn't know like if they were here looking, here to volunteer for a campaign essentially. And but they didn't come with any adults, or maybe they got dropped off, but it looked like they were like looking around for somebody. So I asked them like if they were here for a campaign, and they said yeah, for a county council campaign. I said, oh, who? And they said, um, uh, I don't even remember if they knew the candidate's name at the beginning, but they eventually said Naveen Kurtam, and I said, oh, okay. And of course, I think I might have been handing out some Liz stuff. And so I say like, oh, well, how do you guys know Naveen? And then they said, oh, we're here for our job. And I was like, oh, that's kind of weird. But I didn't have any time to delve further because a voter started coming. And then like a half hour later, there's another young woman who was a little bit older than them, who was also there. And they all had these like blue vests now that said Naveen Kurtam on them. There's the two girls who came by themselves, and then the other girl who came later in a separate group. And I started talking to the two girls again, and I said, "Oh, so you're here for your job? Where do you guys work?" And they said Meriwether. And I said Meriwether. That's interesting. And they say that they're here for their job, and I again didn't get to delve too much because voters came, but then I started talking, and then those two left, and then there's just the one girl who was also a Meriwether worker, and this girl was in college, and I start to ask her, try to delve for details, and at this point, I had already started messaging people in our group about this, and people at other District 1 polling sites are saying that they're saying the same thing. Young people wearing these blue Naveen Kurtam vests, and then they're saying that they work for Meriwether. And so we're basically trying to find out the detail. We hear through the grapevine that they got emailed about this opportunity. So I start talking to the one young woman at my polling site, and I'm trying to like, see if I can get my hands on a copy of the email essentially. And I think she realized that I was, basically probing for information, and so she got stop being cooperative, stop giving me information. But she was talking to a Republican Central Committee member for a long time, who I later talked to once she left, and he said that that they were she told him that they were getting paid $15 an hour, to be there. So I don't know if they were getting paid $15 an hour, if they're getting comp time at their jobs for the equivalent of $15 an hour, or what. But seemingly Meriwether Post Pavilion was incentivizing their employees to go volunteer at the polls for a candidate that they didn't even know anything about. And they were pretty bad poll workers because of that. They were just there for the paycheck, not because they actually were passionate about the candidate. But that's what I saw, and I had a chance to examine the vests and campaign materials closely, and they did not have an authority line on them. So there's potential questions of legality because they are nonprofit, right? And I don't think their status of nonprofit is that they're supposed to be able to be participating in electoral activities, and I believe they get quite a bit of county funding too, right? Or county and state funding, right, Hiruy?
Yeah, so they have received from between the state and the county, I think they have received over $40 million, for renovations, over the years. So, some argument can be made that, because the entity that was, that operates it as a private entity, they can, that they can do what they're doing. But they they're using a public facility. They're making their profits from a public facility, and they were trying to for the last, I think, 2 years, at least for the last year, in the last budget cycle or the previous one, council member Liz Walsh introduced an amendment to one of the budget bills that would prevent the police department from working, from providing overtime hours to the police to work the concerts without getting compensated. So basically, the public would pay, the police work for a private concert, and it was like I think it was like $1.6 million worth of savings if that had been, if that had passed. So I think they're just not happy, with that, and they want someone who would just do their bidding. And so yeah, that I think there was a lot of that, at play. So under any circumstance, they're not supposed to be doing this. It's blatant. It's blatant.
Yeah, I mean, if they're getting $40 million of taxpayer money, and it's probably because they've paid their bribes to the elected officials. Of course, they're going to have an incentive to knock off the elected officials that are not willing to go with their scheme, and Liz Walsh is certainly one of them. So, long story short, with Liz Walsh, the establishment had an embarrassing failure despite a ton of effort and money, and congrats to Liz Walsh, and let's hope that she's very nicely situated to run for a county executive in 2026 with the performance like this against such a well-funded challenger with so much establishment support. But the next race, District 4, also had a developer-funded police union-endorsed establishment-backed challenger. That is Deb Young, who's the incumbent, is using the Citizens Election Fund, is not taking any developer or corporate donations this election cycle. Has also been largely fought against developer and corporate interests, and has held the police department accountable, and all of those things are unacceptable to the establishment as well. So they also funded a challenger, and that was Jansen Evelyn, of course. And the difference there between Jansen's challenge and Naveen's challenge is that, and maybe this had something to do with like the nature of District 1 versus District 4, but in District 1, they clearly, with Naveen, were trying to challenge Liz from the right, and maybe they thought that would be a better strategy. But with Jansen, they tried to challenge Deb from the left, although I want to point out that Jansen is not actually to Deb's left, but that's what they were trying to market him as.
Rhetorically.
Yeah, rhetorically and just aesthetically as well. And so but without actually the policies to match that, of course. Which almost makes it even grosser because it's just an extra level of like dishonesty and gaslighting to the voters. But nonetheless, they were Maybe it's because of this approach. Maybe it had there were other factors as well. But Deb Young luckily won. She was reelected, and the margin again was much closer than the District 1 race. In fact, we weren't able to call victory for sure in this one until July 29th, when all the votes had been counted. But the final election count is Deb had 48.18% of the vote, Jansen Evelyn had 45.66%, and Hank Boyd had 6.16%. So Deb took it by, about 2.5 percentage points. Relatively close race, 232 votes total. And that was after all votes were counted. But on election night itself, the reason I say it was so anxiety inducing, on election night itself, when all they had done was counted early voting and election day votes, Jansen was up by 6%. So that was very scary. You had, one of the most destructive people in the county, developer, attorney, and lobbyist, Tom Cole, who also thinks that he's a elections forecast expert. He was trying to say, oh, 6%, that can't be flipped, and there's no way that deficit can be overcome just from mail-in ballots. And I wasn't going to say it couldn't be done, but I was a little skeptical. I didn't know, but lo and behold, they counted ballots 2 days later. The first set of mail-in ballots, Deb was up by 2%. She did the flip. Provisional ballots came in. The second set of mail-in ballots came in 10 days later, and Deb's lead stuck. I think it might have even grown by a little bit, actually. So that was the huge sigh of relief countywide that Hiruy was referencing earlier, because Deb, took a little bit more work. Well, it was a little bit closer, but Deb, like Liz, did defeat her developer-funded, establishment-backed, police union-endorsed challenger. And I think the county is better off for it. And also given the fact that, she, again, was down on election night, swung the other way from mail-in votes, and she only won her race by 232 votes, and she had the machine working against her, who one of the things she had in her corner was progressive Democrats of Howard County endorsed her. I believe we might have been the only Democratic club in the county to have endorsed her, in fact. And beyond, the PDHC endorsement and backing, our slate did knock, I think thousands of doors for her in District 4 for months. And, when you have a race that gets decided by 232 votes, which really means it got decided by like 116 votes, because you only got to win an election by one vote. So if Jansen just flips half of those votes to him, then he wins. So when you have elections won by that few votes, every door knocked counts. So there's no doubt in my mind that the HOCO for us slate, and the work that we put in her race, likely probably made the difference, among many other things that Deb and others did in the community. The HOCO Watchdogs blog was, I think, very influential as well. But there's no doubt in my mind that we had a huge impact on that race. And, despite Deb being citizens election funded, she may have been out fundraised by her opponent, and yet she still, I think Liz Walsh definitely was, and yet still they pulled it off. So it was scary, but it's also encouraging, and I'm, somewhat optimistic. What are your thoughts, Hiruy?
Yes, same here. I'm optimistic because people should know that there's a lot at stake over the next couple of years. We have the HOCO by Design general plan update, where I think developers really wanted to make sure that they get everything that they want, every single profit subsidy possible. And because of that, as I mentioned earlier, they've been plotting since 2019. And the main way that they've been plotting is by trying to paint council members Liz Walsh and Deb Young as frankly, as racist. There were a couple of episodes where they were the establishment, specifically council members Opal Jones and Christiana Rigby were feigning outrage and doing some performance at the county council to make to sort of help build this narrative. And it they so they they started off, I think, working with both Naveen Kurtam and Jansen Evelyn, and I think at some point they diverted their attention to Jansen Evelyn, and they worked overtime to get a lot of voters out. I mean, and the word is that there was a lot of mobilization in the in the churches, and in the Black churches, various African American community leaders were enlisted, and I think we saw that when the president, the state and local president of the NAACP, Willie Flowers, as well as the president of the African American Community Roundtable, were held a press conference to raise again fake outrage, and help perpetrate a smear, a really abhorrent smear, using the drag racing incident where as you mentioned, Hoko Watchdog's blog played a huge role in covering and putting information out there. And there were so much so that they even enlisted a state delegate from, I believe, Baltimore County, or a woman named Baltimore City, a woman named Stephanie Smith, who out of nowhere came out with some posts on social media criticizing Deb Young, and it was clear that the timing was clear. It was that somehow someone got in touch with her and said, hey, why don't you put this out there? It's going to help us with the narrative. Otherwise, she would not. Any other time, I don't think she would have cared. But again, this is the machine. When the machine wants to do something, they will make sure that it happens, and they almost succeeded. I mean, it should not have been this close. Given the incumbency, given the Deb Young is the incumbent, given her endorsement by the teachers union, given that she's the first CF candidate to be successful at raising money and qualifying, her stance against developer influence and increasing accountability, all of these things play to her advantage, and that all indications are that she had a strong campaign. You mentioned our role at Hoko for Us slate, with the door knocking. We see that the us as volunteers, we did we contributed in a significant way. So the mailers were there. So all of this showed that there was a very competent campaign. So it was clear that there were some forces out there that wanted to make sure that who knows how much Howard Hughes Corporation spent in the background that is not reported in Jansen Evelyn's campaign finance report. There's no way we'll know this. For all we know, voters were being contacted on a daily basis. It's possible. So we, I definitely relieved that at the outcome, and frankly, I'm I'm outraged that, their argument was not, I am, I'm a black person and I'm an immigrant, therefore you should vote for me. I think, it's a valid argument to make, given that in America, there has not been an equitable allocation of power with when it comes to, the African American community. But that was not the argument. The argument was, I'm black, I am an immigrant, but my opponent is a racist. And so that was really, a very, repulsive smear that was perpetrated. And, I think it's going to be a stain in the county, and it should not be forgotten for a very long time. And, I think the people who perpetrated it, all the way up from, the party leadership, the establishment, some people need to be held accountable, and, they should not be in positions of power. And because they really, it was, they really did a lot of damage to public trust, and it was very disappointing. Jake.
Yeah, no, and that was a big part of their strategy was, paint Deb as a old, out of touch, white, conservative, racist Democrat, and the ways in which they went about implementing that smear was, very gross. They, put out mailers attacking her, basically painting her as a segregationist, while ironically actually defacing like historic civil rights iconography. So they putting out mailers misrepresenting her record, painting her in the worst potential light possible as a literal racist and segregationist. With the help of PACs like the Howard Progressive Project, put out illegal campaign ads using the county seal when they weren't supposed to. They just really didn't care about any sort of ethics or legality, and it was very much ends justify the means politics. And the one last story I want to touch on real quick in relation to D4, and what Hiruy mentions of people who operate in this manner with no care for ethics or integrity shouldn't be allowed near any position of power. It's on election day itself, I was at a poll in District 4 that Jansen Evelyn was also at, and throughout the election I really hadn't been in Jansen's presence much, and just because everything is so virtual nowadays. And so this was really my first interaction with him. And, even though we were at the same polling place, I wasn't really talking to him, but he decided to take a shot at me by, he would try to talk to the voters all the way up to the electioneering line so that myself or others couldn't talk to him. So he was doing that with the young voter, and I was standing right behind him trying to talk to the voter before he went in the polls. And Jansen knew I was there. And so Jansen was saying to this young voter, I got the endorsement of this group, this group, this group, this group, and every Democratic club that matters. And of course, that's a shot at me because I'm the president of a Democratic club, Progressive Democrats of Howard County, and we did not endorse him. So for him to say that, he is essentially saying, I got that our Democratic club does not matter. So he said that purposely in front of me to take a shot at our club. And so what I said to the guy was, "Oh, well, you got the police union endorsement too, didn't you, Jansen?" Because he's saying all of his endorsements, and not funnily enough, he didn't mention that one to the young person, probably because he knows it's not an endorsement to brag about, at least not to somebody who was young like that. And so I think Jansen got really embarrassed that I mentioned that he got the police union endorsement. So he got really mad all of a sudden, and he said, "See me in 2.5 hours." Because of course, it was 5:30 and the polls close at 8. So polls close in 2.5 hours. So he's saying, "See me in 2.5 hours. When the polls close, I'll see you in 2.5 hours." talking like how like a schoolyard bully like, talks to somebody of I'm gonna fight you at the flagpole at noon. So he's, saying, calling me out, saying, I'll see you in 2.5 hours. And I know what the implication of that is. That means, he's gonna fight me in 2.5 hours, but I wanted him to say that out loud. So I say, Jan, what do you mean by that, Jansen? What do you mean? He says, "You know what I mean by that. You know what I mean by that." And starts to like get in my face, literally like, walks right up to me within an inch, basically within an inch of my face, starts getting all threatening with me. You know what I mean. I'm not playing them. And then, Hiruy was there for I think for most of this. He was also at the polling location.
Yeah,
Um,
I saw all of it.
yeah, I think it was Harper's Choice Middle School. And he starts saying I look homeless. At least I don't look homeless. And I'm like, this is just another thing that somebody who would a progressive person would never use that as an insult, that somebody looks homeless, because progressive people are supposed to care about homeless people and not use them as a derogatory insult. So I just said, what's so bad about being homeless? He's like, you look homeless. And he uh starts talking to, I don't know if it was his kid, and a volunteer, maybe it was his wife or something, and they're asking like, "What's going on? Like, why are you acting like such a loose cannon, Dad?" And he's saying, "You should see this guy in his slate. You should see how poorly they did in the Columbia Democratic Club straw poll. He's just mad about that." And I'm like, dude, are you really like bragging about the results of a Columbia Democratic Club straw poll? So, this is what type of guy somebody like Jansen Evelyn is, he will threaten you, get in your face, get into physical intimidation because you dared, challenge him and point out that he's actually endorsed by an institution who's done immense harm to the Black community. So for this guy to walk around like he's some, woke bastion for underserved communities when he's happily parading the police union endorsement around, is really pretty pathetic and sad on his part. So that he's I've never seen an elected official with skin that thin, with somebody who's that loose of a cannon, to because I'm always criticizing elected officials, and in that instance, again, he started it actually, but I'm always saying things critical of elected officials, and it's understandable that they have a reaction, but never have I been like physically threatened like that. And we are going to talk about this either way, but this is all that much more important to be talked about because just today we saw an announcement that this guy has just been named as the head of the Police Accountability Board in Anne Arundel County. He was appointed by, Stuart Pittman. And it's like, one, should somebody who was endorsed by the police union, can we really trust them to hold the police accountable? Probably not. And two, again, this is a guy who's, physically threatening and intimidating me over the smallest of disagreements. This is a guy who I don't really trust to take the law very seriously. And so that was a real eyebrow raiser that he's already being rewarded with a position of prominence in a different county without his history being really explained. And Stewart County Executive Stuart Pittman in Anne Arundel County appointed him, and I noticed that they both use the consultancy group Adeo Advocacy. So I don't know if there's a connection through that or something, but I absolutely hope Jansen Evelyn never runs for anything ever again, and should not be put in any position of power, including the Police Accountability Board. So here, I don't know if you had any thoughts before we talk about the slate.
Yeah, no, just to point out, I think to the points that you made, yeah, clearly he lacks the temperament to hold that office. I think there are a lot of thin-skinned, um, candidates and politicians who take it personally when you point out their own records to them, and I don't know what what he would have done when you point out his own record to him. So I think we already have that problem in the county council. So one more would have been would not have been good. So yeah, our just to to talk about our slate. I know that there was definitely a lot of hope and expectation from many, including us, to that some of us will be on this would win that central committee slate. But before I actually maybe talk about that, I want to give you a lot of credit for coordinating this, putting the slate together, because it was I remember it was keeping it all together, all 20 people initially together, people who many of them did not know each other, and juggling all of that, I know is that was not easy. So that was a huge vision that that you had, and it really helped reinforce this this local progressive movement, and really built onto that. And so when I say kudos for working really hard to to put it together, and chairing it, and running it. So with that, I think I think it was an unmitigated success. I don't measure, of course, having people in those seats would have been nice. I think though we really advanced, a couple of things. First was, of course, working with Deb Young and helping her candidacy. The second is we really put out there this issue of developer influence in a way that has not been done, in a major way that has not been done. And it resonated with people. Almost everybody that I talked to really agreed with the idea of eliminating corporate and developer influence in county politics. And and another thing that was striking about our slate is we weren't really out there on groupthink. We did not agree on everything, but we agreed on one important issue, which was the role of special interest influence in eroding the trust in public in public office, in our government. And we I think we were really successful in advancing that message in a major way. So so I want to congratulate all the candidates in our slate who really who put themselves out there, the first time candidates, the immigrants, the women, the people of color, the everybody who because that was really a diverse slate that that you put together. And we it was again, it would have been nice if one of us or two of us or a few of us have been there, but I think I was not discouraged by the results, and I hope all of them continue to to work in county issues. Jake.
Yeah, as Hiruy kind of alludes to, unfortunately, none of our HOCO for Us slate members, which there were 17 of us, none of us were elected. On election night, it was looking like Diedrich Asante Muhammad, one of our slate members, was going to be elected, but after mail-in ballots were counted, they were unfortunately knocked out. So, although none of us were elected, I completely agree with Hiruy that we are successful in many other ways, including playing a decisive role in that District 4 primary. And again, I do not think if we had not run the slate, I don't think we would have knocked all those doors for Deb Young. And I think Deb Young is a good chance she would have lost. So I think our slate, you know, even if we didn't win our own races, we at least, influenced the outcome of a different election, which is still a victory in and of itself. And yeah, like Yuri said, we had a huge influence on the rhetoric this primary season around corporate and developer money, and also what should the role of the Central Committee even be? What should the direction of the Democratic Party be, to the point where, Columbia Democratic Club, I think, put on an event just specifically in response to our slate, talking about that discussion of what should the Central Committee do. So, that we were successful in both of those regards. My takeaways in terms of just pure Central Committee is that uh, door knocking. It's, of course, it's always important, but the less relevant a race is, probably the less impactful door knocking is going to be. So although we did a lot of door knocking, it's for a 20-person committee that most people don't know exists, and so I don't know how much it sticks in people's minds. Of course, again, door knocking is very important. People shouldn't not do it. But we mainly did it only in District 4, a little bit in District 1, but mainly District 4, whereas I'm guessing the opposing slate probably did their door knocking more widespread because they weren't just in it to get certain county council candidates elected like we were. Beyond that, I really think the more low information a race is, probably the more impactful a mailer will be, because people don't do that much research. So the fact that the other slate was able to send out a mailer and we were not, I think really hurt us. And I think there might be further evidence of that by the fact that, you know, the on election day, just from the in-person voting, we did have a slate member win, but after the mail-in ballots, I think the percentage of his vote changed significantly by like 0.17%, which doesn't sound like a lot, but for a Central Committee race where you can win with like 2.5% of the vote, that's actually huge. So we were just out fundraise. We didn't have the money. The other slate, they had a couple of their members donate thousands of dollars to it. They had a former big pharma lobbyist donate $2,000 to their slate. We had a self-imposed $250 fundraising cap. So, you know, we didn't have what we didn't have what it took to win our own race, but we did have an impact on those other races, and we also put out some ideas that actually the Central Committee itself, who defeated us, adopted these ideas. So that's also a victory in and of itself. Criticism we put out was that the Central Committee did not have a platform. Throughout the campaign, they adopted a platform all of a sudden. It could be a lot more thorough. It's not, but nonetheless, that's progress. So one last thing I think why I'm proud that we ran is because it's all of our seats are county wide, and it's a 20-person Central Committee, and we had basically 2 full slates plus people from outside the slate. From outside either slate running, there was like 45 people on the ballot just for that one race. So it was a very long ballot, and I saw people from all different counties pointing out how ridiculous that was, and people from this county pointing out how ridiculous that was. And the reason why you never see that in other counties is because other counties comparable to Howard County do their Central Committee races fundamentally different. They don't elect all of their seats at large. They elect some of them at large, some of them by legislative district, some of them, maybe by county council district. So, and that makes it so that, you can't just run the entire slate all on one ticket and have that really long ballot. So the way that Howard County does it is unique. And I do think it makes it a little bit harder for a slate to run and win. And so since this was the first time something like this had really happened, I do think people are starting to question whether our central committee structure in Howard County should be changed to be more like other counties, whether that's, by state legislative district or by county council district. I personally think county council district would not be a bad idea, because when you do state legislative district, it still gives, the state senators and delegates to just add central committee members to their slate. So it still keeps the machine politics going. But by county council district, since there's only one elected official, um, it discourages the slate machine stuff, and it ensures that if a county council member gets elected and runs a slate of central committee candidates, at least the central committee candidates will be aligned with the county council member that district chose, which kind of makes sense. So it ensures if you have one good council member, you'll have at least some good central committee members as well. So we'll see if that change gets implemented from now in the next 4 years. But I agree. Thank you to all the HOCO for Us slate members for running, and was really encouraged to see. I think everybody has a similar takeaway as you, hearing that it was not a waste of time. And I think, everybody is already like, where are we in 4 years? Let's go again. Let's run in 4 years. Let's run for something else. So I think people caught the bug. And so I think we're gonna wrap up the podcast there. That was the Howard County 2022 primary election results. And in terms of where we move forward from here, we didn't talk about it, or we did talk about Chow Will. He's going to need, for the reasons we referenced earlier, he's not going to have that Democratic establishment support. So we're going to hope to, have the slate and PDHC fill in that gap, try to get him to flip that seat blue. And then also Joan Pontius for District 5 and County Council. The Central Committee did not field a challenger to the sole Republican David Youngman on the County Council. So that's where we came in, and we did that. And we got Joan Pontius, who was supposed to run on the slate with us originally, but because she's using the Citizens Election Fund, it's not allowed to run on a slate. And so she's running for county council, has qualified for the Citizens Election Fund, will have the money to compete with David Youngman. The district has now been redistricted to be majority Democrat, and it went over 46% to a Democrat in 2018. So this really could be the year to flip that seat blue, and not only just flip it to any Democrat, but Joan Pontius will be the third vote for Liz Walsh and Deb Young for the grassroots, to fundamentally alter the power structure for the better for the grassroots if we can get Joan Pontius elected. So Joan Pontius and Chow Wu, that's where a majority of our focus from now until November 8th is going to be. So be on the lookout for, campaign activities for both of them. Luckily, their districts overlap quite a bit, so we can kind of campaign for them simultaneously. So I think we're going to call that a podcast there. That was episode 20. If you want to subscribe to our email list, follow us on social media, keep updated with what the club's doing. Check out our link tree, linktr.ee/HOCO progressives, and we will see you all for episode 21.